I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but the truth had been circling me for weeks. Atlas 3I was never a comet. I felt it in the way the numbers refused to behave, in the way the frequencies bent around my equipment, in the way the air shifted every time its trajectory changed without explanation. People saw a celestial object crossing the sky. I saw something conscious watching us back. I was in my private research annex when it happened, a soundproof observatory buried beneath my own headquarters. My team thought I came here to avoid distractions. The truth was simpler. I didn't want anyone to see the way my hands trembled every time Atlas 3I appeared on the monitors. They chalked it up to exhaustion. I pretended they were right. Pretending was easier than admitting I felt watched. The first distortion wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, almost polite. The holographic display flickered, as if reality blinked. Then the star map warped at the center, bending inward in a way only gravity wells were supposed to bend space. But the calculations didn't match a gravity well. They matched something else, something active. Something intentional. I felt the pressure shift in the room, the same way air changes when a storm is forming far away. I leaned closer to the screen. Space shouldn't behave like that. Time shouldn't behave like that. But the pulsation behind the distortion wasn't random. It had rhythm, structure, language. My breath caught because, for the first time, the map wasn't showing me an object moving through space. It was showing space moving around the object like reality was adjusting itself to make room for something older than the rules that govern it. I told myself I was imagining things, hallucinating, seeing patterns where there were none. But when I stepped back, the room didn't step back with me. The edges bent, curving as if the walls were breathing. The overhead lights stretched into long, thin ribbons before snapping back to normal. My pulse hammered. My rational mind screamed to catalog the phenomena. My heart whispered something different. This isn't new. You've felt this before. For a moment, I wasn't in the observatory. I was somewhere else, somewhere open, bright, impossible. A coastline with white cliffs. A sky that shimmered like liquid glass. People walking slow, unafraid, looking at one another with a kind of gentleness I had only witnessed in dying moments of strangers I tried to save with money. It wasn't a vision of the past. It wasn't imagination. It felt like a memory of the future, a place waiting for us. Then it was gone. The room snapped back into focus. My knees nearly gave. I grabbed the edge of the console to steady myself, but the console flickered beneath my fingers like its atoms were negotiating whether they wanted to remain solid. Something was happening inside me, an opening I didn't ask for. I had spent years dismissing the spiritual, the divine, the unseen. Yet here I was, breathing in sync with an object 300 million miles away. As if it had a pulse and I was learning how to hear it. I tried to regain my composure, but the screens began to light up one by one. The main hologram, the side monitors, the emergency displays, even the offline units. All of them showing the same thing, the distortion expanding, curving, blooming outward like a flower folding open. And in the center was Atlas 3I, glowing, steady, unmistakably alive. I swallowed hard as the realization formed, quiet, undeniable, final. This object wasn't drifting into our system. It wasn't passing by, it was arriving. Just then, the lights in the annex went out all at once. Darkness swallowed the room. The monitors didn't power down, they simply turned black, as if something behind the screens had blinked. A faint hum vibrated through the floor. Low and steady like a heartbeat I wasn't ready to hear. Then, from the far end of the room, I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. I wasn't alone. The next morning, the city felt off in a way that had nothing to do with traffic or noise. I boarded my private helicopter at sunrise, heading toward my remote research facility far outside the city. As we lifted from the rooftop pad, the sunlight hit the skyline at a strange angle, like the day was running on the wrong script. Through the window, Atlas 3, I shimmered faintly in the daylight sky. Still visible, impossibly visible. And the same sentence kept circling in my mind, Atlas 3, I was never a comet. We were heading to my remote research facility, a place I had built for experiments too unconventional for public eyes. Today it felt more like a place where the truth would corner me. My engineers believed we were investigating gravitational anomalies. I already knew better. We were going to test if reality itself had started to talk back. As we flew over empty land, the sky shifted. A spiral of clouds tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. The pilot checked his instruments, muttering. The altimeter flickered wildly, skipping whole ranges. The ground stretched farther away, then snapped back. "Storm on the radar?" I asked. "There's no storm." When we landed, the air felt heavy, not with weather, but with time. Sensor towers rose like metal trees. As I walked between them, the portable console in my hand glitched. The graphs didn't rise or fall. They folded. Timestamps repeated the same second twice. Then the cameras began replaying the same 5-second clip, me walking across the yard. In one loop, I turned my head. In the next, I didn't. For a moment, it felt like multiple versions of me were trying to exist at once. I closed my eyes, breathing slow. My entire life, I had believed reality could be forced into order if I worked hard enough. Now reality was bending by itself, and I was the one struggling to keep up. I looked up. Atlas III hovered above the horizon, faint but visible even in daylight, its elongated body glowing with soft blue fractures. It looked less like an object in space and more like a presence. A tone rose from the nearest tower. The air shimmered, and suddenly the facility vanished. In its place, I saw a field of tall grass at twilight. People walked calmly, speaking gently. Children played without fear. A world without rush, without noise, without masks. A world that felt like a memory from the future. The vision blinked away. The gravel returned. My knees weakened. "Shut everything down," I said. "We'll lose all recording. We're not here to record it. We're inside it." By late afternoon, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. A vertical column of clouds formed above the facility, spinning in place. Wind burst and died in opposite directions. Dust spiraled around my feet. My watch reset itself, seconds racing, slowing, racing again. I walked toward the vortex. Beneath it, the air wavered like a cold mirage, bending the towers behind it. The world grew quiet. Too quiet. The faint pulse of Atlas III beat above me like a distant heart. My phone vibrated. The unnamed icon appeared again. When I tapped it, only a spiral filled the screen, growing brighter and brighter until it became pure white. I looked up. The same white light now glowed inside the vortex. Threaded with soft blue lines, the same pattern etched across Atlas III's surface. It wasn't asking to be decoded. It was inviting. All the power, all the control I had built in my life felt small next to this moment. I took a breath that wasn't fully mine. Then I stepped forward into the bending air. For an instant, with no length at all, everything disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The truth kept looping in my mind like a frequency I couldn't shut off. Atlas III was never a comet. It was something sentient, intentional, aware. And now that I had said the words, even if only to myself, the world around me felt thinner, like a curtain I could finally see through if I just dared to look long enough. By morning, the distortion outside my penthouse windows had intensified. The skyline bent at the edges, like heat rising off asphalt, except the air was cold. Very cold. Eventually, the walls of the penthouse felt too tight. I grabbed my coat and left out of instinct, letting my feet decide where to take me. I ended up driving far outside the city, where the wind hit stronger and the sky widened. I pulled over by an empty stretch of desert plain. Nothing but sand, rock, and a straight horizon. But the horizon was wrong. It curved upward slightly, like space itself was bending toward me. I stepped out of the car, and the ground vibrated under my shoes. Suddenly, the air rippled. A distortion line shimmered in front of me, thin at first, then widening like a tear in reality. A circular pulse expanded outward, warping the landscape. The mountains in the distance twisted, then snapped back into place. My breath turned shallow. I wasn't imagining it. Reality was stretching. The sky darkened for a moment, though the sun hadn't moved. It was as if the atmosphere itself blinked. I felt the same pull in my chest that I felt in the observatory, that soft, terrifying recognition. Not fear, but familiarity. Something inside me whispered, "This is the threshold." I took one step closer to the distortion, and the world fractured into a mosaic of light. For a second, I saw two versions of the plane overlapping, one barren, the other luminous, alive. Filled with figures moving slowly like silhouettes of a future we haven't reached yet. I blinked, and both visions fused back into one. Another pulse tore through the space in front of me. This one had weight, sound. It came like a deep harmonic resonance that traveled through my bones. My legs weakened. I dropped to one knee, pressing my palm into the cold ground just to steady myself. And then I saw it. Not with my eyes. With that deeper sense I had been ignoring my entire life. A glimpse of a world beyond violence, beyond fear, beyond the exhausting performance of strength. A world where we finally remembered how to love. The vision sharpened. Children laughing near a river of glowing water. People greeting each other with the softness of those who fear nothing. A sky clear enough to see the stars even during the day. No masks, no walls. Just human beings awake, finally awake, stepping into the version of ourselves we were always meant to become. My heart ached with something I hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Not naive hope. Recognizing hope. I exhaled slowly, and the distortion pulled back like a tide. The horizon straightened, the ground steadied. But something inside me remained open, raw, impossibly alive. I stood up, shaking slightly, brushing the dust from my coat. The silence around me felt different now. Not empty, but waiting, ready. I knew I couldn't go back to my penthouse and pretend nothing had changed. As I turned toward my car, my phone vibrated again. The same unnamed icon lit the screen. But this time the message loaded without my touch. A single line appeared, glowing white against the black background. You are not alone in this awakening. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if it was Atlas III or the distortion. Or something even older. But the message felt true in a way nothing else ever had. A second line appeared beneath it. Others have begun to see. A third. Find them. The screen went dark, the desert wind went still. I stood there with the realization settling deep inside my chest. This wasn't just my transformation. This was the beginning of a collective one. A shift already unfolding, quietly, invisibly, waiting for people brave enough to admit that the world as we know it is only the first layer of what is real. I got back in the car, gripping the steering wheel while the last echo of the distortion hummed in my bones. I didn't know where to drive yet, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was drawn to it. The horizon no longer looked like a destination. It looked like an invitation. And I accepted it.